Hey everyone, my name is Sam and thanks for checking out my video. Make sure to check out my channel as well and hit the little subscribe button down below. So this is my weekly wrap up. So once a week I wrap up all the books that I've read. So this week I actually read 7 books, which was really good. I mean, it's averaged one a day. I loved some and then I didn't love a couple of these as well. So I want to give my rating, a summary of the book, and then my general thoughts on why I gave it the rating that I did. All of these except for one were new reads for me, and then I reread one, which I will point out. So the first book that I read this week was Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. This is an East Asian retelling of the Dark Queen, the Evil Queen, and this peasant girl works to become empress. And it's the first book in what I believe is to be a duology. I actually ended up giving this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It just was not for me. I think a big contributor is the timing of this book. Retellings have been just almost exhausted, honestly, in YA. I'm rather exhausted of them. And this just didn't really do anything for me. I loved the setting, and that was kind of it. And the cover, it's a very pretty cover as well. I just don't know that I'm really going to be picking up the sequel. I'm debating unhauling this just because I seem to be kind of the odd man out. Obviously, you're not going to force yourself to like a book, but maybe I want to give it a reread once I'm in that kind of mood rather than just reading it because, it's on my TBR, I should get to it kind of situation. My big problem with this was the main character. I love a good villain. I mean, right here. Every good fairy tale needs a good villain. And I love this whole trend of books giving the alternative perspective rather than just villainizing someone, knowing their backstory and everything. And I just, the main character was honestly infuriating. Her inner monologue of becoming a beast or something was very odd to me. She was just a horrible person to, I think his name was Wei, the original guy that was very clearly interested in her. And at points she blatantly says oh, I forgot about him. She's been dragging this dude along and I just didn't get her. And there's just a lot of things too. I think if you're going to bring up, concubines and all that kind of stuff where women are very clearly deemed inferior in the society, I think there needed to be a little bit more analysis for my taste anyways. And I just didn't really end up enjoying it. So at this moment, I don't see myself picking up the sequel, but I am glad some others liked it. This just didn't do it for me. I wasn't written the way I wanted to. The character wasn't the one that would speak to me. And, the villainizing of each of the women and the concubines and then betrayal again of women. It just wasn't exactly what I was expecting or honestly wanting. So the second book that I read this week was The Library of Fates by Aditi Khurana. This, I think, is actually the only book that I read without an audiobook this week. This book it's a standalone, and I find fantasy standalones a little bit difficult just because a lot of authors either overdo or underdo the development, and then if they overdo it, it's just such a long book that you're just you should have made this a series or a duology. This book, in addition to having a very, very pretty cover, so this is I think, Indian folklore retelling of there is a kind of peaceful, passive kingdom that is betrayed and invaded by the king's former friend, and there's this mystery surrounding the girl's lineage. I literally fell asleep with my face in this book because I wanted to keep reading it, and it was so late at night. So overall, I ended up giving this a book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. What really just withheld it from giving that full 5 was I didn't totally understand some of the reveals and the reveals of her lineage was the confusing thing. There's mentions of being deity and then but then someone's mother, and then there's this kind of very blatantly talking about, oh, your mother's still alive, but then you never actually, that nothing ever comes of it. So I think it could have had a little bit more tie-up, or some things could have just been left out in total honesty because they were never really dealt with fully and they weren't essential to the story. I really enjoyed the questing and I really enjoyed the wrap-up of this book. At the beginning, there is this whole, she is a princess and her best friend is her guard, and then all of a sudden when things are about to go down, they fall in love and realize all these feelings. But that is not where it continues to go. It doesn't end up in this happily ever romantic after with that dude in general, but overall, just period, it's not about the romance. She goes on this quest and she's a fully capable, and there's some time travel, which I was not totally expecting, and kind of discussions of fates, which is really where the name comes from. You never really go to the Library of Fates. It's just referenced, and then you get to the end and you kind of see, it all wraps up like in the very last page almost, that I was like, that is the perfect title for this book. So I would actually really highly recommend this book. Like I said, I don't think I totally understood all of it, and it's going to be one I definitely reread. And the author note at the beginning is very, very kind of heartbreaking and heartwarming, and it kind of gave me this sense right at the beginning of, I'm definitely going to like this book. The third book that I read this week was Otherworld by Jason Segel and Kirsten Miller. This book I ended up giving a 3.75 out of 5 stars. It's probably a little bit closer to 4, just based on what I've rated other books 3.75 stars, but it didn't quite hit that 4 for me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to be picking up the sequel. It is kind of like a Ready Player One mixed with Warcross. There is a virtual reality game and company corruption and a main character. The main character's name, I believe, is Simon, and he has this thing for this girl, and there's weird things start happening, and he's in a very privileged situation. I really enjoyed this book, not to the fullest extent, I think, as Ready Player One, but I think I enjoyed it more than Warcross. My real issue with this is I absolutely love this concept of video games and virtual reality. I hate when that is taken and then slapped on with the male saving a damsel in distress trope. That's not what we want in this year. I hope that the second book kind of turns that on its head, and because it really is, she is a damsel in distress to her male stepfather who is evil, and he, the boy, is going to save it, and he is privileged financially and such. I really liked the main character, Simon, nonetheless. He is flawed and in the best ways, and he's sarcastic, and he's fully aware of the privileged situations that he's in. And sometimes he has taken advantage of them, but he knows how to push people's buttons, his parents especially, he calls his mom and dad out on things, and I don't know that I would have, the strength to do that in his situation, but you do see a lot of growth in him, though, despite having those sarcastic and very blunt things that sometimes make him come off as kind of a jerk, and depending on your side, could have been a bully. He does have morals, and he stands for those very clearly. He doesn't have this whole, oh, I know that this is good and this is bad, but if I do this, I lose none of that. He knows what's good. He doesn't care what the costs are. And he ends up in the end taking on this giant corporation. And the last few chapters, I wasn't totally sure who I was going to start, who I should like anymore, because a couple characters get kind of twisted all over the place. And I don't know. I'm just really curious to see where the second book goes. There's also this kind of his best friend, not the romantic female lead, but this female kind of sidekick, which again, male lead, female sidekick, meh. She has this potential, I think, she is potentially kind of dying almost, and she has they have a real opportunity with her to let her take advantage of that and do some amazing things, and I really, really hope they do that. And instead of just kind of continuing on this rather traditional thing. What I want from these, I love these books that are having video games in them, but I don't want that stereotypical male to be revolutionary. In addition to bringing video games into books, bring something else into books that's different and sets you apart. The fourth book that I read this week, and it was my reread, was Snow Like Ashes by Sarah Rash. This is a fantasy where there are 4 weather kingdoms and then 4, I think they're called rhythm kingdoms, that go through all the 4 seasons. And the winter kingdom, called January, I believe it is, was invaded by, I think it's a spring, and each of these kingdoms was given a power that the ruler, the monarch, would pass along. Some of the kingdoms have their powers go to the female heir, and some of them go to the male heir. So the issue with January is that the female queen that was supposed to pass it along to her female heir actually had a son before being killed. And it picks up with the remaining, I think it's 15 refugees, essentially displaced people of the January, trying to get their hands on items of magic that would solve the whole problem. And there is a lot of political maneuvering and betrayal, and then there's this lineage reveal of several people, and it's my biggest problem with this book was I don't know which romance I'm cheering for, but that is not the only thing in it on any means. This female character has zero interest in being manipulated as this marriage alliance tool. She is not for that. She has her own thoughts and she wants to learn, and she is not romantically interested in any of these people until they start showing that they support her and want her to discover things rather than like teaching her and dragging her along their path, which I really loved. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars, just like I did the first time. I want to reread Ice Like Fire and Frost Like Night, I think before These Rebel Waves, which is the author's new series, comes out in, I believe it's August. It's one of my most anticipated releases. I would very highly recommend that book. It was supposed to be a group read, but I don't think anyone else in the group read it, so shame on them. The next book that I read this week was The Language of, there we go. The Language of Thorns, which is the prequel, I guess it's technically, but it's the folklore and fairy tales used kind of as the background culture of the Grisha world, which is the Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising, as well as kind of the Six of Crows duology. This book, I think I give it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. I don't know exactly what it was that was missing, just slightly. There was just something that just withheld me from giving it that 5 stars totally. But nonetheless, it is I love this. I love Bardugo's writing, and she gives it these stories. There's obviously some heavy influences of some traditional fairy tales, you know, some Red Riding Hood and Hansel and Gretel, but she keeps not only true to like the darker grim influences on them, but she does make them her own, and she gives it this Russian feel while also making it different enough that I didn't kind of just go, oh great, another retelling. The really cool part about this book is the illustration. So each page has illustrations on it, and as you go through they keep adding, and then at the end you get a total picture. And each fairy tale has like a title page, and it alternates between this like gorgeous like turquoisey and this like dark maroony reddy pink. I kind of came away with like 2 big favorites, even though I really did enjoy all of them. The Two Clever Fox one was really, really cool. I didn't see that ending twist kind of coming. I really liked The Witch of Duva. It's got the Hansel and Gretel influences, and I don't even know why particularly. It just like, I keep thinking about it for some reason, and I think it kind of inches it out as being my favorite by just a little, is The Soldier Prince, and this is the last picture of it. I'll show you. I think my love of that chapter or story really comes from how similar, just like at a glance, it was to the Dollmaker of Krakow, which I really, really loved this year too, and just having like the puppet master, toy maker kind of thing. It's not really the same moral lessons or anything. I just like automatically connect it, and I think that's why like it just inches above as being my favorite. The 6th book that I read this week was These Shallow Graves by Jennifer Donnelly. I think I give this a 4 stars, and it's honestly a very high 4 stars, almost 4.5. So this is a kind of murder mystery at the time of this weird kind of hierarchy still in society, and like there's the very rich and then there's the very poor. The main character, Jo, is in a position of privilege financially and status-wise, and her father owns part of a company. I think it's like a transportation company or something along those lines, and he accidentally kills himself while cleaning his gun, and that is kind of where the thing takes off. And Jo goes through this whole transition, and it's kind of just like, it reminded me a lot of Otherworld, where she's not quite as flawed. She's flawed if you like the stereotypical like female position at the time. She's independent, and she's very smart, and she has an idea for what she wants for her future that does not align with what her family, her mother, or her grandparents have in mind for her. They've kind of already got her married to some guy. And then this other gentleman enters the picture, and he's a reporter. And her father owned part of the company, I think, that he works for the newspaper for. And as the story evolves, you find out that he is from the opposite class, and not only that, but just very opposite positions in terms of family. He's got a brother in prison, he's got a sister with disability because she was abused so much as a child, and it just became very apparent to me that she did a lot of research into this historical time period, and that really shone through, and I so appreciate that when people do historical fiction. There's actually a bibliography at the back of books that she used to help inform herself about this time period. I'm actually kind of looking right now to find some nonfictions to pick up after I read Radium Girls and really enjoyed it, and I think some of these, just based on the topic, are ones that I'm really going to enjoy, so I really, really appreciated that part. The real reason that I didn't give this book a full 5 stars was the whole ending reveal. The last chapter, you knew I think I knew about 10 chapters before it was like officially revealed who who the murderer who done it was. And it was very obvious to me, and that person was on my radar from the very beginning. So that was one thing that I feel like could have been done a little bit better. My brain just kept going like, don't do it, why are you doing this kind of thing, because Jo is a very mentally capable person, and like obviously in the story at the time she's got lots to be thinking about, but as smart as she is portrayed, I feel like that is something that she should have saw in this. I know she has the nepotism kind of situation of it being family, but like you had to have seen this coming, and even like her friends who don't have that family relation, they should have seen this. There's just like tons of reasons why it should have been seen, and red flags should have gone up before. I will say this though, at the end there is some lineage reveals that I honestly didn't think were going to happen, because they could have been left as just mysteries and it would have still been a good story. It wouldn't have really taken anything away. But there were reveals, and I was like, did not see that coming. Didn't see the actual reveal, but then just didn't see the lineage as well. But then you stepped away and like, oh my god, that makes so much sense. And the last compliment I have for this book, my obsessively like organizational part of my brain was really happy that this book has 100 chapters even. Like that is, I love that. Not that that in any way says anything about the book. And the last book that I read this week is Ivory and Bone by Julie Eschba. I ended up giving this a book a 2 out of 5 stars, and I think I just really didn't like this book overall. So this is like a prehistoric clan rivalry betrayal kind of story. I love the concept of the time period, and I've read parts of The Last Neanderthal by Claire Cameron. It's on my December TBR, but there is a lot of potential and cool things that you could do with the time period, and being as kind of like vague, it's just kind of like a prehistoric. There's no specific year. You can kind of be flexible and play off of like things that we think we know about this time period. But honestly, I think this book was miscategorized. It's not really a historical fiction. I honestly don't know why the time period was chosen. The author didn't take advantage of this time period at all. My first big confusion was they're in prehistoric era where they hunt like mammoth period, yet they all somehow speak the same language, but that's never discussed. There's also this very European colonized mentality, and as well as like one of the female characters says something along the lines of like, well, what's your ideal woman? And the dude basically just describes like, I want a passive woman who will just agree with me and take whatever I give her. And I was like, what? No, you guys are in like a hunter-gatherer nomadic, y'all are gonna die if these women don't reproduce for you society. Why are you going to pick a time period like that and then have the mentality? I didn't get that. I also really hated that this was, I think it's technically second person, where like the main character is talking to me and like describing me as like his lover. I think too, like the fact that I didn't like the characters of the book itself didn't help. I don't like when it's written like that. Just no. I also didn't understand this entire very romanticized use of romance. Again, why pick this time period if you're going to take a modern perspective on romance? Like, they are literally, like, big issue in this is the clan is, like, down to, like, a dozen people and there's no women. Like, you got some stuff to figure out there. And then, like, the main character's, I think, other brother or whatever makes some comment of, like, well, it's okay, can't I just like her as a friend and not as a spouse or whatever? You have to reproduce to survive. Why is that? And I mean, monogamy is not something that, I mean, like, we have a very different perspective of, like, staying, romantically with a specific person once you're married and all this stuff. These are all very modern things. I just didn't get why the author took this stuff and then placed it in this time period. And honestly, the historical time wasn't developed. There was, like, mentions of mammoths, and that's kind of it. They could have taken it and put in really any other, like, historic time period and just swapped the animals out, and it would have been really the same book. So those are all the books that I read this week, not including my reread. I think my favorite book was either The Library of Fates or These Shallow Graves. I think I'm leaning just slightly towards The Library of Fates. I think it was a little bit more unique. Like, I loved These Shallow Graves, the murder mystery thing, but I don't think I've read a whole lot of other cultures' retellings and tales and stories. And I just really appreciated what the author was able to do in such a short book. So I'm definitely going to look more into what she's written and what else she has coming out in the future. So those are all of the books that I read this week. Have you read any of these? Let me know in the comments down below. Also check the description box down below for all of my social media links. If you follow me, I will follow you back.